Hello and welcome to Between Two Moose, a show where we get to discuss trends and topics tied to teaching and learning with technology. I'm Chris Sessoms, Director of Academic Affairs at D2L, and I'm joined as always by Kenneth Chapman, Vice President of Market Research at D2L. And today we have a special guest with us. It's none other than Michael Feldstein, who is the Chief Accountability Officer at eLiterate. And Michael has been a partner at MindWires with the notorious Phil Hill for many years, providing strategic planning and product management consulting for universities, textbook publishers, and ed tech companies. And he's a great friend to have to D2L. So we're really excited to welcome Michael to our show today. Michael, how are you?
I am blessed, Chris. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me today.
Well, thank you. And Ken, I know you had some burning questions you wanted to toss Michael's way. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, Michael, one of the things that you've been really busy with lately and over the last year is the Empirical Educator project. I've been a part of that. I get the goosebumps thinking about the work that's happening there. Do you want to tell our audience, what is the Empirical Educator project? What does it mean? And then I'm going to ask you, what does it mean now in a post-COVID world too?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, I was raised in a family of teachers. I think of myself as a teacher. And so I have a very specific notion of what it means to be a teacher beyond the profession. For me, teaching was about listening. That's what I was taught from the time I was a kid. It's about understanding who's in front of you and responding to them both with empathy, but also with some skill to identify where they are in their learning process and how you can help them along. So that is empirical education, right? You are being empirical by responding to the people in front of you. One of the problems that we have, particularly in higher education, is that nobody gets taught how to do that. And this is ironic in an environment where you have people who are just down the hall from world-class researchers who are learning about how people learn. So empirical education on one level and the Empirical Educator project are really about changing the culture at universities so that the people who are dealing with students in the classroom or online today can spend up more time and get more support in thinking through what it is that they need to do to support their students and how they can improve their craft.
Great. So something that was a challenge and worthy of a mission before COVID. Now as educators are struggling with, this sort of first phase of remote instruction, very much synchronous, in our last couple episodes, we talked about some of the ways that creates accessibility barriers and things like that to be doing remote instruction versus more planful online learning. How does one think about being an empirical educator when going through this kind of crisis transition and in thinking about what do I do next semester when we're still going to be fully online, most likely?
Right. Well, the first thing that I want to say is how grateful I am and how much I admire the people who are on the front lines dealing either as faculty or as support people right now, just dealing with the crisis, trying to help students through a situation that is, to say the least, not ideal. And as somebody who is not on the front lines, I'm very mindful and careful about giving too many prescriptions to people who are struggling to get through their day. But it's certainly, especially as we start to get to the other side of this first wave of the crisis, and make no mistake, this is just the first wave. And we start thinking about, okay, we're likely to be continuing to do this next semester to some degree, and what does that mean? What we know from past experiences with more orderly transitions of faculty to online teaching is that it can be a tremendous positive learning experience for them because, and I just published a piece in EdSurge this morning about this, about learning engineering. It really forces you to re-examine and dissect some of the things that you do in the classroom instinctively that work. You may have some assumptions about why they work and some assumptions about what's going on when they don't work. But when you're put in a very different teaching context, it really forces you to think on a different level about what you're doing and not just fly by instinct, right? And that's, again, in a more orderly transition, you're generally helped as a faculty member by support staff who are professionals in this, who've helped a lot of faculty through this, who are trained in this, and you get a chance to learn a lot of craft, and you also get a chance to bond with people who could be helping you on a regular basis. So as with anything else in this crisis, a lot of what happens next depends on what choices we make and what we do. But the opportunity here is to get through the immediate crisis, keep people healthy, keep students in school, keep schools solvent, and then really think about what we're learning from this crisis about first principles of educating that hold true and can be translated into many different teaching environments.
So Michael, you used the term learning engineering.
Yep.
And I think that's super relevant to kind of double click on, because it comes back to what you were talking about, you know, that teaching is about listening, and really learning engineering is about creating a purposeful feedback loop. And it resonates to me as a technologist, you know, with agile development and iterative thinking. So can you describe, you know, what is learning engineering? How can someone that's thinking about what their student experience looks like online right now ingest that idea?
Sure. So first of all, don't be put off by the term engineering. That's the first message. Learning engineering is a term that was coined at Carnegie Mellon University, which among other things is an engineering school. And it was coined by a gentleman by the name of Herb Simon, who was a polymath. He was a Nobel Prize winner in you know, I can't remember which science I want to say physics, but I could be wrong about that now. But he also thought quite a bit about design. He is the grandfather of design thinking, really. And he thought a lot about education. And so he used the word engineering because it made sense to him. If you're a literature teacher, don't be put off by it. The heart of it really is about self-examination. I just was talking about feedback loops, how as a teacher, you're always looking to create opportunities for students to show you what they understand and what they don't, and to adjust your teaching based on that. But as you're doing that, you have in your head some idea of what it means for a student to become an expert in the subject that you're teaching, and how they develop that expertise. And that model in your head is something that you largely developed on your own. You picked up bits and pieces in most disciplines from the professors that you had, who developed it in the same way that you're developing it. So there's a lot of sort of tacit knowledge there, but there's also a lot of tacit assumption. And so learning engineering adds a second feedback loop where it says, okay, let's try to be as explicit as we can about what we think is going on here when students learn. Let's try to articulate that in a way that we can test, because every teacher has an experience where something they do in the classroom doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work for one or two students, or maybe it doesn't work for the whole class, right? And we need better ways to figure out what went wrong, right? Maybe there was something that fits our model that we can just tweak, but maybe our model was wrong. Maybe students don't learn in the way we think they do in this particular case. And that really gets laid bare when you're forced to teach in an environment that's radically different from what you're used to, like moving from the classroom suddenly to online. So learning engineering, number one, acknowledges that everything that we think we know about how students learn is just a hypothesis. And number two, it suggests that teaching is a team sport, that there's a lot of expertise involved in knowing how to examine those beliefs that you have in your head, how to test them. And there's a lot of knowledge about deep structure of how humans learn, that not everybody can be equally expert in that. That's okay. And that it's a good idea to partner as an expert in your subject area and an experienced teacher of your subject with somebody who has more specialized expertise in testing those hypotheses about learning.
You know, one of the things you just triggered for me, Michael, and by the way, if you're just joining us, welcome to Between Two Moose. My name is Chris Sessoms. I'm the Academic Affairs Director at D2L, and I'm joined by Kenneth Chapman, who's Vice President of Market Research, and our special guest, Chief Accountability Officer at eLiterate, Michael Feldstein. So Michael, one of the things that you triggered for me was, I go back to my teacher education days where a fellow, last name Zeichner, was very popular for writing about critical reflection. And in teacher education, one of the things that we were taught when I was in teacher college was this idea of when and how do we make time for that critical reflection? Just what you described, like when my lesson goes south after spending hours of getting it, planning it, thinking I got everything right, and it doesn't. How do you think about, or what are ways that you think that would be helpful for people to think about reflecting on that, and how do you make changes based on that? I mean, is there any insight that you might have around sort of critical reflection in this regard?
Yeah, so let's start by acknowledging a couple of things. First, now is the absolute worst, most difficult time for many educators to try to make time to reflect on that. They're just trying to get through the day. Mm-hmm. And I think you have to be kind to yourself in those circumstances and do what you can for your students. And let's also acknowledge that even under ideal circumstances, as they exist today, not ideal, but under, let's say, optimal, realistic circumstances, it's difficult to clear time to do that reflection. But I think there are lots of ways to get started. The simplest one, many colleges and universities these days have full-time staff experts on these things. You go knock on a door and say, this was one of the benefits that I had of growing up in a family of teachers and then working in K-12 before moving to higher ed. I was completely shameless about going to somebody and saying, look, I just did this and it fell flat and I don't know why. I don't know what is going on here. And of course there are books and there are courses. That's hard to engage with in the moment when you're just trying to solve a problem for the students who are in front of you. But it's a good idea to recognize that this is a core part of your professional expertise. Understanding. So in an ideal world, you're learning about these new ways of thinking about your teaching practice before you get to that moment. And then if you need to go for help, you have some context and some common language that you can use. But I think that the most basic thing is to try and strip down when something's going wrong and you analyze what you thought was going to happen, ask yourself, what are all the assumptions that I have here that could be wrong?
Right.
What am I missing here? What have I assumed as bedrock that just could be wrong? That's where all empiricism starts, with the question, what if I'm wrong?
So, Michael, one thing that I empathize with for educators right now is everybody is just pumping out resources. Then there are phenomenal resources, but there's almost so many. It's hard to find the signal for the noise. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, and if you don't have it, that's fine. But is there anything that sticks out in your head that's, these are some of the core, easily digestible materials that you've come across, or starting point for some of the ideas that we've had in our conversation today?
Well, it's a problem, isn't it? Because there is a lot of content that's being put out, some of which has been out for a long time, but isn't well adapted for the moment, right? So Carnegie Mellon Simon Initiative has entire courses on this. The University of Central Florida has a lot of content in something called Top Kit, but they weren't necessarily designed for emergency purposes. And then there are over 500 continuity websites that are listed in a spreadsheet, a Google Sheet that was organized by someone in POD. Let's see if I can remember the acronym right. I think it's Professional Organizational Development Network. Each one of those links goes to a site that's just full of information. Yeah. So I think we have a problem right now that we have lots of resources. Many of them are useful, but not well adapted to the moment. And they're hard to get it's hard to get the resources to the point of use. As if I'm at a professor, I need one thing, and it's often a very specific thing. So I could list off a bunch of links that might be good, but it's really hit or miss about whether you on the other end of the screen here watching this are going to find it useful for the problem you're facing in the moment.
Yeah, it's very much that just-in-time learning that we've talked about over many years, really being salient and critical in the moment.
Yeah, we and this is something we don't as educators who can control their space, right? You've got 15 weeks, let's say, in your term. And you can, when students are there in the physical classroom, you can, for the most part, shut the door. Right now they have devices and they can connect to the internet, and so it's harder. But you still, just in time means it's week 7 and you've set them up for this thing that's coming, right? Now one of the big discoveries about online learning for many instructors is that students have lives, right? And if you're not able to put them physically into that bubble of the physical classroom, you are coming into their homes or into their offices, or right now, their home offices, at a moment when they're dealing with their kid who's home from school and 6 other things are going wrong. And so just in time is something that I think this is another thing that we can take away from this crisis. As educators, it takes on new meaning when you go through this process, and you can start thinking about it for your own professional development. This is what I need.
That's very good advice. I appreciate that. And it is a bit of a tangle out there right now, trying to figure out where is the thing that I need. My first reaction would be to go to my own institution And as you mentioned, Michael, virtually knock on doors at this stage. We are, in the wall behind me is my wife, who's an instructional designer at Johns Hopkins University. She's on a Zoom call right now with faculty members, making their lives hopefully a little bit easier and helping them get their courses up and running. It's a super challenge right now. I know we're getting close to the end of our time here. Michael, is there something that you think is real imperative, or a message that you'd like to share with our viewers, that something you'd like to just a takeaway that you think is really valid at this point that might be helpful for folks?
We're in a moment in which we really find out who we are, right? We're learning a lot about the people around us and who they are, right? You don't really know, honestly, how you're going to behave until you're in a crisis. And we all tell heroic stories to ourselves about how we would have, behaved if we were in a room with Hitler, right? But now we're actually finding out who we are. And so it's also an opportunity to decide who you want to be, right? And as your teaching skills are tested in this environment, in addition to your endurance and your finances and everything else, it's a good opportunity to really take note. You're not going to be able to do much with it in the moment, but take note of the things that you notice about your practice as a professional educator. And take note also about your feelings about yourself. That phrase, professional educator, is not how most faculty or instructors are taught to think of themselves in their graduate training. So try it on for size. Are you a professional educator? Is that what you are? If so, then what are you learning about how you want to inhabit that role? What are you learning about the things that you wish you knew, the kinds of books you wish you read, the kinds of help you would like to get to become the professional educator that you'd like to be? And then go to those people on campus, or keep that in the back of your head when you're talking with them. Use this opportunity as you solve the crisis of the moment or address the crisis of the moment to maybe take that conversation just one step further if you can.
Wonderful advice, Michael. Thank you. And thanks everybody for joining us today on Between Two Moose. Everybody stay healthy and take care of yourselves.
And thank you again, Michael, for joining us.